Eskom CEO André Ruyter says that they are not anticipating blackouts this coming week, although power generation challenges remain at the power utility. He says he's reluctant to blame sabotage for the current situation because it is difficult to distinguish between sabotage and negligence. Eskom suspended stage 2 load shedding at 5 o'clock this morning. This after generation capacity recovered enough to enable it to stop the blackouts. Now let's discuss these issues and others and now we're joined via Zoom by Thandile Chinyavanhu, who is a climate and energy campaigner for Greenpeace Africa. Thandile, thanks very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me.
You're most welcome. Let's talk about this 131 billion that richer countries are pledging to contribute to poorer countries at COP26. Will this be enough to contribute to South Africa to end what we're calling, I suppose, a coal addiction of sorts?
Well, the South African government has been campaigning heavily to have access to these funds that have been promised by the global north countries. And ultimately, that pledge has been made. But unfortunately, that amount of money is still minute compared to what South Africa needs to do to really mitigate its threat of climate change, as well as shift away from carbon dioxide emissions. It's not going to be enough to decarbonize the country, but certainly is a good start.
Yeah. You know, we also know that coal mining sector is a key player in South Africa, not only when we're talking about employment, but also just in terms of reliance. And one wonders if, the process of transition might impact on lower income homes and people who, in any case, don't afford electricity as it is. Might this not make things more difficult in terms of affordability of the basic that is electricity?
Well, the purpose of the funds is to aid South Africa in a just transition, to ensure that in the process of decarbonizing that the social standing of the society is not compromised by the shift away from coal. But the reality is that renewable energies have been quite cheaper and more accessible and affordable than coal-fired power stations over the past couple of years. Massive subsidies have helped in decreasing these prices. And ultimately now it's the most plausible solution for our government to pursue in pursuit of our energy security.
Where have we seen examples of this? And I'm going to ask specifically closer to us here on the African continent, where indeed the transition from coal has in the long run benefited different countries, and particularly I'm talking about those that are impoverished. I'd like to know of the substantial examples that we can actually look to.
Well, Greenpeace Africa conducted a case study looking at coal-dependent regions and how they've handled a just transition in the past. Most of those countries are beyond the African continent, being in Germany as well as Poland. But it also looked at other countries that are more in the infancy of their just transition, such as South Africa and Indonesia, and the measures that have been implemented there that have been quite pioneering. For example, in South Africa, the introduction of auctions have been quite a new phenomenon. But with regards to the African continent and how we can see renewable energies being deployed, Kenya is a great example of how renewable energies have been able to provide some stability there. Kenya historically has always used renewable energies in the form of water, specifically hydropowered renewable electricity. And for a long time, they've been able to have that energy security supplied by renewables. It's only recently that the global north has begun to see Africa as an emerging market and has pursued coal projects there, such as the Lamfo project, which thankfully was shut down.
Yeah. Do you feel that South Africa is ready for the switch from coal to renewables now? I mean, just if you consider how long it took to get Medupi and Kusile online. And I'm also one to think that, if you've not perfected your old ways of doing things, will that not be more difficult when you're trying to get into something else, when you're trying to transition into something else? And one wonders about the obstacles that might be in the way in our quest to move elsewhere. I mean, I'm sure you know all the problems we've been having with Eskom the last couple of weeks, and one wonders if we won't even have more problems when we move to renewable energy.
Well, the greatest concern for us right now is the fact that it's not a matter of whether we're ready or not. It's a reality of what is necessary. And the current system is definitely not working for us. And renewables offer the potential to be readily adapted and put online a lot quicker than new coal-fired power stations would require. As you mentioned with Medupi and Kusile, we already saw massive cost overruns, and they're still not functioning at the full capacity that they should be. So what we want to see is our government prioritizing renewable energy, as this has the potential to reduce our emissions by 84 metric tons a year. And this is a massive amount, and definitely something we need to implement immediately if we are to avert the massive extreme weather events that are going to become a part of our reality if we don't transition away from coal-fired power stations.
And I wonder why the burden is really on African nations at this time, when we're not really the ones that are responsible for everything that's happening in terms of climate change. I mean, just now at COP, at that particular conference that's taking place at the moment in Glasgow, China and the US did basically admit that they've been the biggest, the largest emitters of CO2, of carbon dioxide. And one always wonders, you know, you've done this terrible thing, and then the burden is on the rest of us to make things right. And I always wonder how fair that is. On the back of that question, and sorry to load up the questions here, but should rich countries essentially be paying for the damage that is caused, by climate change?
Well, the biggest concern right here is that our South African government and certain proponents of fossil fuels in our government, specifically Minister Gwede Mantashe, are pushing this rhetoric that Africa is a monolithic group and that we are collectively all the least responsible for this issue of climate change, when the opposite is true. Maybe for some African countries that can be the case, but for South Africa, we're the 12th largest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world, not just on the continent. So we definitely, undoubtedly have a historical responsibility to contribute towards emission reductions. And so the Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015, makes provisions for a common yet differentiated responsibility. So while we recognize that the Global North definitely has a greater share of responsibility in mitigating emissions, South Africa does also have a responsibility, though it may be to a different degree. So what we want to see right now, as we mentioned, is for these countries, the Global North countries, to pay for or compensate for some of the damage that they've caused. So following this 131 billion in concessional funding that will allow us to aid in a just transition, it's important that our government also push for a loss and damage fund to compensate for some of the damages and losses that the people of South Africa are likely to incur and already have incurred as a result of extreme weather events.
All right, Thandile, thank you very much for giving us your time. Much appreciated here on SABC News.